Oh, you know, speaking of Dzogchen, though, I wanted to go back to something that was read at the beginning from the Asian Journal. And also an extremely striking passage of Merton's that I don't think you could do too much better, reflecting spirituality in general, but including Buddhist spirituality, about arriving at a state of mind in which the mind is free from fear, for example, and revulsion against, however he put it, against unwanted things, etc. And he said, I don't know, I haven't tested to see whether this would work to the degree of being in a concentration camp. But I have a feeling, he was saying, I think, that this is something that would work in extremis. Well, there is a very, well, there are many, many people who have been Dzogchen practitioners, who have been in prison camps. One of them I can think of, Yangtang Tulku Rinpoche, for 23 years. And when he got out, he was celebrated for having had the courage to, in the case of lay people and monks who came to him in the camp, and Tibetans rely entirely for their spiritual sustenance on recitation of prayers. And of course you were not allowed to move your lips because that might indicate you were saying a prayer, and that was against the rules. So they said the prayers inwardly, but they asked Yangtang Tulku Rinpoche if he would write out the prayers for them because they didn't remember them by heart. So he did that, and of course he got into terrible, terrible trouble and suffered the consequences when he was caught doing that. But he kept doing it as part of his mission. So he had a rough time. He survived. And when he got out, Tulku Tandrup, the Lama who wrote that book, The Healing Power of Mind, said to him, Yangtang Tulku Rinpoche, what was it really like in that prison camp for you? And Yangtang Tulku Rinpoche said, oh, it was not very, very good for other people. But for me, it was fine. And of course, bearing no grudge whatsoever against the gods and the whole system, in the sense that maybe, you know, that whole imposition of a very deeply unjust system of prison camps and all the rest of it, it was a phenomenon, just phenomena that dissolve into emptiness, you know, and there's no point in wasting time blaming the god.
Well, at the same time, you've written or been quoted, and I quite agree with you, that perhaps the attainment of sanctity requires a period of anguished awareness of one's own deficiencies, the grave, and awareness of the grave sufferings of others. I wonder if you could say some more about that. I mean, we've raised this issue of suffering in a very specific case. Can we talk about it in light of the fact that the Buddha strove to help his disciples be liberated from suffering, and yet you're suggesting with this story that there's a way in which suffering liberates one from suffering?
I think you're so right. In fact, I don't think anything liberates you except suffering. The whole bodhisattva ideal is based on that. Maybe
you should explain the bodhisattva ideal.
Yes.
There may be people here for whom that's a new idea.
Well, we have a very historically centered appreciation of things, and so the suffering and sacrifice of Jesus Christ is in a historical context for us. Stories that appear to us mythic have also very powerful effect on the Buddhist mind. It doesn't have to be historically centered, but maybe it is, I don't know. This famous story that in a past life, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha that we all know, who taught Buddhism in our time, in our world, he was a bodhisattva. He was a being intent upon attaining enlightenment. And you have to go through, well, endless, endless lifetimes as an ordinary being whose mind is deluded and obscured by emotional defilements like envy and jealousy and hatred and pride and ignorance. And then many, many lifetimes, if you overcome that state of ignorance as a bodhisattva, a being bent on enlightenment, before you actually become a Buddha. And all beings are destined to become Buddhas. In fact, all beings have the Buddha nature inherently in them. It's just that their minds are clouded by these obscurations. So he was walking along and he saw a tigress, and the tigress was very, very hungry, and she had some cubs, and she couldn't feed her cubs. She had nothing to feed her cubs with, and he said, "Oh, poor tigress, how terrible!" And he was so overcome with sorrow for the tigress and the cubs that he just gave the tigress his body. Well, that's very, very much in the spirit of the Christian bodhisattva, the Lord Jesus Christ, to give everything, everything. And that's at the very, very heart of Mahayana Buddhism, that there is no other point. Spiritual attainment has no other point. See, there would be no point in discovering something called intrinsic awareness in Dzogchen unless it was intimately, inseparably related to the function of compassion. That's all. And so, what do you think?
Yes. No, I agree with you.